Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. The issue of balancing environmental sustainability with energy security and affordability is a major focus for power-stressed South Africa and for the rest of the world. Terence Creamer joins me today to discuss some of the latest thinking around producing more energy but less carbon. Terence, welcome to Second Take. Canada hosted the 21st World Energy Congress this week. From your reading of things, what were some of the major themes to emerge?
I think your intro summarized it quite well. We need more energy but less carbon. And that's easier said than done. You know, we have to come up with an equation or a generation mix that is sustainable for the long term. And that means that we have to start reducing the carbon intensity or the carbon emissions from energy production. Energy production accounts for something like 60% of world greenhouse gas emissions. In order to reach the target of is that we shouldn't breach 450 parts per million by the 2050 sort of deadline. That's sort of the big framework we're working in. We're currently at about 390 parts per million, and we're growing at a sort of 2 parts per million every year. So you can see it's going to be very difficult as we bring more and more people into urban economies and more energy is demanded. In fact, they're talking about something like 2 billion people coming into the urban economy by 2030. That's 10 Londons. You know, it's a massive amount of people coming in. There's going to be surging demand. Now, it's very unclear. Some people are saying that demand for energy is going to be something about 30% higher by 2030. Others say it's going to be a doubling of the energy output that we're going to need by 2030 to actually meet people's energy demand. So obviously people are looking at renewable energy technologies. Those are very important, but they're fairly immature technologies and fairly expensive. So the whole affordability of that, especially in a context where energy is so important for development and bringing people out of poverty, electricity there's a strong link in that whole development equation between electricity access and raising your standard of living and producing more. So it's going to be difficult. So I think there is a realization there's no one single technology. Energy efficiency technologies are also high on the agenda. You know, the less we can use and consume, but produce the same level of output, the better. But there's going to be fossil fuels in that mix. There's going to be nuclear power generation in that mix. And I think there's a growing realization there's no silver bullet. There's no one technology. We have to find a way, even with fossil fuels, to just make those a lot cleaner in the way we produce. But there's also a realization that carbon is not free anymore. It can't be emitted freely. There is a cost to this. That cost somehow has to be reflected, either through taxes or through the fact that actually we're going to have to capture and store that carbon, and that's going to come at a cost, and that's going to have to be reflected in the price of producing coal-fired generation.
In South Africa, extensive work is underway to develop a power generation roadmap for the next 20 to 25 years. Where do we stand on this?
Yes, unfortunately it's been fairly slow in coming. You know, we had the integrated resource plan published late last year. That was the first fairly anemic plan that only takes us to 2013. There was a lot of unhappiness about it. It's very coal dominant, very little space for renewables, very little space for private sector participation in the whole mix. But we were promised that there would be an integrated resource plan 2010, and initially it was thought it would come out in the first half of the year. We're now sitting in September, and we heard last week that they wanted to publish the document, the integrated RRP 2010 as it's called, on the 1st of September for sort of to stimulate public comment. But that has been delayed, and I asked yesterday a question at the cabinet briefing whether it was going to be going before Parliament. No date has been set yet, so there have been delays. But by all accounts, you know, a lot of work has been done on this vision, and I think it's fairly soon that we're going to start seeing the first scenarios being published in a public comment phase. And I think by the end of the year we probably will have that drafted. And I think that there again, we're going to start seeing those same conundrums coming in that I spoke about earlier. Coal is going to play a big role. I think there is a feeling nuclear is going to play a big role. You must remember nuclear is a zero carbon emitter. China, in fact, is currently building 20 nuclear power reactors. And they're talking about planning for the next 20. So some countries have already moved into that whole realm. But renewables, I'm sure, are going to feature heavily in this. We heard yesterday about the the 150 billion solar park that's been planned for Uppington, and hydro and other technologies, as well as imports and cogeneration, I'm sure will feature. But we're still waiting with bated breath.
Much emphasis is given to renewable energy and exploiting shale gas. How is South Africa positioning itself in these two areas?
Well, I think this whole thing about wind and solar, I think there's definitely an impetus being built around it. I know it's not happening yet, and I think there's a lot of frustration because everyone's waiting for the IRP 2010. But I think that the one great thing about these renewable technologies is that they can be brought in incrementally and fairly quickly when you compare to a nuclear or a coal-fired power station, which take many years to plan, get the environmental approvals, and actually build. It's a long lead time. So that's the one advantage that these renewable technologies have over the conventional technologies. And we saw that the Cabinet did consider the Clinton Climate Initiative's study into a massive 150 billion rand, 5,000 megawatt solar park concept in Uppington in the Northern Cape. So you can see there's a lot more thinking about it, there's a lot more emphasis going into renewables, and I think government's keen to develop a whole industrial policy plan around these green energy technologies. In fact, I think that's going to be one of the issues around that park. Do we have multiple technologies within that park so we can test them and develop them, see which are the most efficient in that sun-drenched part of the country? Or whether we go with a fleet-type model where we just go for concentrated solar power type concept and actually build a whole industrial complex around that and try to become the leader in these large-scale systems, because they have been done at fairly small scale. This is now utility scale we're talking about, and try to become an export location for that. And then, on the other side, there's a lot of excitement around shale gas. There's also some controversy around it because it is water intensive, and people are concerned that, for instance, there's a lot of exploration going underway in the Karoo, and if that does develop, what is it going to mean for the sort of the sharing of water resources in that dry part of the country? But shale gas is gas that sits and it has not been fully exploited, but technology, hydraulic fracturing has come into the sort of realm now, and it can liberate that shale gas. Gas production and power generation from gas is far more clean than coal-fired power generation. We just haven't had much access to gas in South Africa. It's something like between 30 and 50% cleaner than producing from coal. So you can imagine a hybrid between gas and maybe concentrated solar power together, giving that a sort of a baseload field. You could have some very interesting scenarios coming out of that. But we're still some way off. And we heard from Shell; they're very excited. They spoke about it in Montreal, Canada this week, about the prospects in South Africa for shale gas. And Sasol was also looking at a project in the Karoo. But everyone's warning that these are long away. We're talking about 2020 type horizon. So yes, the renewable story is definitely starting to gain traction in South Africa, and so is the whole shale gas story. But we're some way off.
Terence, thank you very much. That is the Second Take show for this week. Join us again next time for more news analysis.